As the saying goes, nothing in life is ever stagnant. Well, for the Detroit Lions, yet another major change is coming their way as the Patriots have hired Terrell Williams. But is there a silver lining? We're going to talk about it, so stay tuned.
What are we? What makes us what we are and what we're going to be? It's grit. It's what we started with last year, guys. Doesn't matter if you have one ass cheek and three toes. I will beat your ass.
Can definitely compete with the big dogs.
10-5 end zone touchdown Detroit Lions.
You guys are unbelievable, man. I'm telling you.
We are driven by Detroit.
Hello, Detroit Lions friends, fans, and family members. Welcome on back to yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host, David T. Pike. And as always, we're diving on in. My friends, I'm just going to get this out of the way because this is going to be a huge part of why we're having this episode conversation. So, what am I trying to say? Officially, it has now come across the news wire that the Detroit Lions are going to be losing defensive line coach Terrell Williams, who has now accepted the job to become the defensive coordinator for the New England Patriots. Now, this should not come as a surprise to anybody for one very big, albeit though, simple reason. Let's understand who the Patriots hired to be their head coach. Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel was the head coach for the Tennessee Titans for quite a number of years. Gee, where did Terrell Williams come from before he came here? He was with the Tennessee Titans. So Vrabel and Williams already have a very well-established history together. Obviously, Vrabel felt very highly about him, thought that he was going to be a good coach that he could bring in to be a defensive coordinator. So obviously, this is a well-earned and a well-deserved promotion for Terrell Williams. Now, I'm just going to say this right now. Unlike Benedict Johnson, I will say this. I want to thank, obviously, Terrell Williams for what he did for us. Definitely made a huge impact with our defensive line group. Was able to maintain the integrity of that group for the most part over the course of the season, despite the litany of injuries it had. Obviously, Marcus Davenport, Aiden Hutchinson, Ali McNeil later on in the year. So the fact that, Williams was able to maintain that group to be still a formidable group despite all of the major injuries, I give him a huge amount of credit for that. And obviously, I want to congratulate him on obviously earning the promotion to become a defensive coordinator. But this is why we're having this episode. Other than the fact that, the Lions have lost yet another coach to become a coach elsewhere, this now being the second official one, this news ought to definitely excite people for one major reason. And I'll tell you why. It has everything to do with the Rooney Rule. Now, I know that for some people, hearing that term, the Rooney Rule, is not exactly one that typically gets people excited because there is a lot of damn controversy that surrounds that rule. However, though, for the Lions, this is going to become a major area that I believe they are about to exploit when it comes to the NFL. And if things go the way I think they're going to go, they're going to be able to hit the jackpot once again. Hence the name of the title for this episode. Because what exactly is the Rooney Rule? The Rooney Rule was originally implemented, I think, either in 2002, 2003, which pretty much stated that teams had to, at the very least, interview one minority candidate for either a GM opening position or a head coaching position. Over the years, there have been a number of different amendments to said rule. Now it states that you have to have at least one minority coach on your offensive staff. You also have to at least interview a minority coach for offensive and defensive positions as well. There's a number of different things that have been added to this, and they've also stated that minorities are not just to certain ethnic groups. They've also stated that it also belongs to women. So they're including women as a minority as well because, well, let's be fair, the NFL has been predominantly a male-oriented league. But why are we talking about the Rooney Rule in regards to Terrell Williams? Here's the reason why. What most people don't know about the Rooney Rule, at least the way I'm interpreting it, and I could be wrong, I will admit it, but based upon the evidence and based upon the research I've been doing, The Rooney Rule is not solely excluding just to the fact of whether or not a coordinator becomes a head coach or a personnel that's associated with a front office becomes a GM. It's also related to any minority coach, if it's a position coach, who then becomes a coordinator, because the whole purpose of the Rooney Rule is to try to promote minority people to become higher end up personnel, whether it's head coaches, GMs, executives, whatever the case might be. Now, why is that important here? The reason why it is important here is because typically when you have this situation happen with the Rooney Rule, you will typically see teams that have a minority coach that was employed by them who then becomes employed elsewhere, either as a head coach, as a GM, or as I'm explaining here with Terrell Williams, a coordinator, which is a clear promotion from a defensive line coach. They will be awarded a third-round compensatory pick. Now, how does this work with the Rooney Rule? The way it works is that in the case of a head coach being hired from a previous coordinator or a personnel that works in the front office to a GM, is that you would get a third-round compensatory pick for 2 straight years. Typically the upcoming draft, which in this case is the 2025 draft, and then the next draft, which is the 2026 draft. So that would be if only we would have one coach that would, become a head coach or a GM, which obviously in this case for the Lions would be Aaron Glenn. Because, again, let's be entirely honest with ourselves. Let's not pull any punches. Let's not beat around the bush here. The Lions are most likely going to lose Aaron Glenn. At this point, it's just merely a matter of who he decides to go with. The betting odds favorite at this point is currently the Jets. However, though, Aaron Glenn does have an interview today with the New Orleans Saints, and the reason why I think that Aaron Glenn didn't accept the offer yesterday with the Jets isn't necessarily because he didn't want to go there. I think he felt an obligation to at least hear what the New Orleans Saints had to offer him, because the New Orleans Saints were who made him into, kind of like what he is right now, because he used to be a coach with them. He got his connection to Dan Campbell through the Saints, so I think he feels an obligation to at least hear them out first before he just signs with the New York Jets. So, plus, on top of that, the New York Jets have already hired, well, they haven't hired, but they're, again, looking towards hiring a former Lions front office executive that also has connections to Glenn. So, again, it would seem, in all likelihood, that the Jets are the front runners for hiring Aaron Glenn. But, again, I think Glenn is wanting to give the Saints an opportunity to at least present their case as to why he should, go with them. But getting back to my point here with Terrell Williams, let's just say the 99% likelihood probability Aaron Glenn signs with either the Jets or the Saints. At that point, then, automatically, the Lions get a compensatory pick in the third round for this draft in 2025 and in 2026. But we've already lost Terrell Williams. Terrell Williams being a defensive line coach that just got hired for a promotion to defensive coordinator, also, according to the Rooney Rule, at least the way I have read it and interpreted it, would also mean another compensatory pick, most likely in the third round as well. It could be lower because they hand out compensatory picks in the 4th, 5th, and 6th, and 7th rounds. So it most likely would be in the third round, but it could also be in any of those other rounds below the third round. I'm just simply saying. So let's think about this. At the very bare ball minimum, the Lions are going to get, once Glenn gets hired, 2 third-round compensatory picks, one this year and one next year. But, again, if I'm interpreting the rule the correct way, the Lions could, in theory, get a third-round pick on top of the one they're getting this year for Glenn this year, meaning they could have 2 third-round compensatory picks, or they could have a third-round pick and a 4th, 5th, 6th, whatever other compensatory pick that the NFL decides to grant them because of Terrell Williams being hired. Now, why am I saying all this, and why am I saying that this is something that the Lions could exploit to give themselves a jackpot? Because let's understand the man that's in the front office, Brad Holmes. Say what you will about all this other stuff that's going on right now, but how has Brad Holmes been when it comes to the draft? The guy has been a damn near savant. Brad Holmes has been arguably one of the best GMs over the last 4 years. He's hit on damn near more than 50% of his draft picks, I'd be willing to bet. And when it comes to his prowess, a lot of his success has definitely been in the early rounds, 1 through 3. And in the third round, he has found a lot of success using his draft picks, and not just for drafting. Let's take a look at Brad Holmes' draft record in the third round. Go back to 2021. He hit on both of his third round draft picks in Ife Melifonwu and especially in Aleem McNeil. Then you go to 2022, hit yet again on Kirby Joseph, who has arguably become one of the best, if not the best, ball hawk safety in the NFL. And then in 2024, what does Brad Holmes do? Brad Holmes uses that third round pick that we have, and he uses it to trade for Carlton Davis from the Tampa Bay Bucks. And again, some people might have mixed feelings about Carlton Davis. That's fine. But if you take a look at his stats according to PFF, Carlton Davis had his best year since 2019 as a cornerback per their coverage grade component with the Detroit Lions. I believe it was a 72.1. But if you also take a look at his basic physical stats according to PFF, he did rather well for himself. According to PFF, Carlton Davis allowed 43 completions off of 72 targets, which was for 59.7%. So sub 60%. That's pretty damn good. Only allowed 583 yards, 3 touchdowns to 2 interceptions, so a 1-to-1 ratio almost, and an 87.9 passer rating, so a sub 90 passer rating. Let me just put it out there for what it is. Considering the fact that Brad Holmes was still able to get Terrion Arnold, who despite his up and downs had, I think, a pretty decently good rookie year, and we also have Enos Rakestraw, who's been, freaking developing in the wings, and then trading a third-round draft pick for Carlton Davis, who had a pretty solid first year in a new system with a new team, I think that Brad Holmes has shown his prowess to be able to use third-round draft picks either in the draft for finding good talent or using those picks to find good talent on other teams to supplement the team already. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because let's just call it for what it is. Let's just say Brad Holmes gets 2 third-round compensatory picks this year for both losing, Glenn and Williams. I don't think that's most likely because Williams is only getting promoted to a defensive coordinator. So I think more likely what would happen is the Lions would probably get a third for Glenn and maybe a 4th or 5th for Williams. But let's just play devil's advocate and say he gets both third-round picks. That would now mean that Brad Holmes has a first, a second, 2 third-round picks, and then I think it's a 5th and 2 7ths or something like that? That would mean now Brad Holmes has more than enough draft capital to make a multitude of moves. He could do one of literally several things. He could either use both of those third-round draft picks and decide to trade up to potentially get a difference maker on defense, so like a Jack Sawyer or somebody like that, to pair with, Zadarius Smith and Aiden Hutchinson to really amp up our pass rushing game. Or he could take those third-round draft picks and say, hey, maybe I want to trade down for getting more players in the 4th round, 5th round, whatever the case might be, so I can really build up our depth because we had so many injury problems this year. Or Brad Holmes could go the exact same route he went with Carlton Davis and say, hey, there's a guy I really, really like on another team that might be willing to deal him. Let me see if I call them up and see if they're willing to take a 3rd-round pick to potentially trade for him. Because Carlton Davis, I think, was a pretty good acquisition, and the stats back me up on it. So, literally, if, again, I'm interpreting the Rooney Rule the correct way, at the very least, the Lions are going to get 1 compensatory pick this year once Glenn gets hired. But if they get also a 3rd-round pick for Terrell Williams, that's huge. But even if they don't get that 3rd-round pick that I'm suspecting they might get, getting a 4th-round pick or another 5th-round pick, it's more draft capital in which Brad Holmes can use to his advantage to either bring in more talent for development or for depth, or potentially use as a trade package to move up and get someone that he truly, really likes. And Brad Holmes has done this multiple times in the past. My honest belief is this. Should, let's just say, we get a third for Glenn and a fourth for, Williams, or a fifth for Williams, whatever the case might be, I believe that Brad Holmes will use either the third or both of those picks to probably move up and to get a true difference maker in the draft. Because let's call it for what it is. Brad Holmes is smart. Brad Holmes is able to read the writing on the wall. Yes, injuries definitely screwed us over this year, but you will be able to supplement that by finding good, solid players in the free agency market. What you truly want to find are difference makers in the draft, and let me tell you something. There's a good number of defensive difference makers, playmakers in this draft that would look really good in Honolulu Blue this year. So, that's what I think Brad Holmes could do, but I'm not taking anything off the table for him. But those are my thoughts. I wanted to talk about, obviously, Terrell Williams getting hired, but I also wanted to talk about how this could truly be something the Lions could exploit to their advantage, because if, again, I am interpreting the rule correctly, the Lions are about to get, at the very least, 2 compensatory picks, but potentially even more. And when you give Brad Holmes more ammunition, that's a dangerous thing for other teams, because now it means he has more options, and the more options you give him, the more dangerous he gets. But having said that, I believe I've explained my position and my viewpoint, so I'm going to end this episode and say thank you all for watching in another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. If you like what you saw, by all means, I highly encourage y'all to watch the next episode. Also encourage y'all to do one of these 3 things: like, comment, and subscribe. If by chance you subscribed in the past and you forgot to do so at the time, want to highly encourage y'all, please make sure you hit that bell notification icon so that you guys never miss any more content I push out. Also want to encourage y'all to share the content with your Lions friends and family members. Share here on YouTube, share it on Twitter, share it on Facebook, share it anywhere and everywhere you possibly can. And with that being said, I hope y'all enjoyed the content, or at the very least, you got something out of the content. Whether you're a long-time viewer, this is the first time watching me, I truly hope that was what I was able to bring to you, which was a good show in which you got something out of it. Also hope everyone has something in their life that makes them happy, makes them smile. God bless, my friends, and until the next time we meet, I'll see you all in the next episode.